Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with my February wrap-up. I just want to mention first off that I did make my Queen of the Fae goal. I got 17 points, which was the minimum you needed, but I still made it. The first book I finished was We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is a nonfiction. I think it's adapted from a TED Talk that she gave, and it's basically what it sounds like. I really like Adichie's style. It's very conversational and engaging. I do think if you're already like pretty well versed in feminist thought, I guess, and the perspective, I'm not sure you would find much in this that you didn't know or that you hadn't thought about, but I think that there's still value in reading these kinds of books because they kind of make you think about it in a different way, or they put it into words that are really easy to communicate, and I really like that about her nonfiction. I also really like how Adichie uses her own experience as a Nigerian woman and uses that to kind of show the differences and the similarities and how different countries and different cultures kind of treat women, but the ways that the way that sexism is a problem across the entire world. I did end up giving this one 4.5 stars just because there were a couple of places near the middle where I feel like she kind of, like the way she was talking about the differences between men and women, it was things like women have babies and men don't, and I'm like, well, like, not all women have babies, you know, that kind of thing. From what I hear, she has kind of adapted her thought. That's not a position that she holds anymore, but that is something that kept me from giving this the full 5 stars. Next, I finished A History of Glitter and Blood by Hannah Moskowitz. This is about a group of fae who, there's like this war that's going on between the fairies and it's like kind of goblin creatures, and it's very confusing. This is one of the weirdest books I have ever read, but I ended up really enjoying it. I do want to say, like, it's super dark. Like, there's a ton of content warnings for like murder and like cannibalism kind of, and also some like questionable consent things, because there's like this, it's like some of the characters are basically like prostitutes or like sex slaves. But this is a really unique story, and I liked the way it was told. Like, you kind of learn things about why the narrative is structured and told the way it is, and I actually really liked that. I thought it was really clever and interesting. And I liked the writing style itself. It could be kind of like clever and witty, but it was also just like really strange and dreamlike, but not overly done, I think. I mean, there were definitely a couple places where I sort of felt lost about what was happening, but I think that was intentional, so it didn't detract from my enjoyment of the book. It's definitely a very strange and dreamlike world and setting. Another thing I liked was the like really interesting creatures, like the different species in this book. Some of them were things that I had never really come across. They were like very unique, that I think the author had invented herself, and it was really interesting. And that combined with the really like morally gray or like morally confusing characters in this book, like, it was really interesting because I couldn't really make up my mind about which characters I liked and which ones I wanted to succeed until like the very end. And it did take a little bit for me to connect with the characters because the style was so strange. I really liked this like really intense bond of like friendship and almost like bonded by trauma that the group of main characters had. There are multiple queer romances in this. There's at least one male-male relationship and at least one female-female relationship, so that was really great to see. And yeah, it's like, this is such a bizarre book. I don't know how to recommend it to people, but I am really glad I read it, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I had my first 5-star book of the year that was not a reread, and that was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I finally read this book, and all of the praise is 100% deserved, which is not surprising to anybody. It's about a main character named Dana, who is a black woman, and she starts getting transported back to the antebellum South. Specifically, she always seems to get transported back in order to save the life of a character called Rufus, who is the son of a plantation owner. And then we follow her as she like keeps getting pulled back in time and how she has to adapt to this time that is really obviously dangerous for her. And I really loved this book. This was so fantastic. I really like some of the thematic elements of this book and the way it explored responsibility, you know, and how people's circumstances affect who they grow up to be, but how after a certain point you are still responsible for the kind of person you are. I've mentioned that before. That's a theme that I really like explored in novels, and I think that this book did that brilliantly. I really like the immediacy of the writing style. Actually, my friend Huck from Bad to Reads, she talked about this book recently in a favorite books, I think her favorite books of 2018 video, and she talked about how the writing is very straightforward and immediate, and how that really contributed to the story overall, because you felt like you were reacting with Dana. Like, there weren't a lot of long descriptions of her emotional response because you almost didn't need that. Like, you were feeling it with her. Dana is such a survivor, and I really liked the moral quandaries she runs into about saving this boy's life, and it was just really, really fascinating. And obviously, for as far as content goes, there are pretty much all the warnings you would expect with a story like this. Rape, abuse, death, extreme racism, and prejudice. I just really don't know what else to say about this book, but it was amazing, and I gave it 5 stars. Next, I finished Noteworthy by Riley Redgate. So we follow our main character, Jordan Sun, and she is in a very prestigious arts school, and she does not get into the musical. She does not get cast. She has a very low voice. She's an alto, and there's not a lot of parts for altos. So she decides that as kind of a last resort, she's going to dress up as a boy and audition for a part in an all-male a cappella group at her school. And she gets in, and the story goes from there. This is really a book about the arts and about friendship, and about what people are willing to do to succeed in something that's important to them, and I absolutely freaking love this. I love how developed the friend group was. Like, every single character in the a cappella group that we got to know, I felt like they had a distinct personality, and I really cared about all of them. There's also a romance in this book, and at first I was like not really on board for it. I like wasn't sure how it was gonna work out, but by the end I absolutely loved the love interest and Jordan together, and I just thought it was done so well. I love how funny this was, and like the writing style. Like, the book opens with Jordan basically talking about how everyone knows that it's good to plan your existential crisis on a Friday, because then you have an emotional breakdown on Saturday and you kind of recover on Sunday, and then by the time school starts again on Monday, you've managed to get past it and you can like just shove all of your feelings into a corner. And as soon as I read that like first page, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. Like, this is painfully relatable, but I enjoyed it so much. I loved the setting of like this art school, and Jordan is a theater student, so even though she primarily spends a lot of her time with the a cappella group, it was really great seeing that. I really loved how this book felt like, it felt like a real theater program, you know? Like, sometimes you read about books that include plays or like theater classes, and it's like the only reference to it is like, our teacher assigned us a monologue from Romeo and Juliet, and I'm like, okay, most theater teachers would not assign that. Like, so she actually did other things. I don't know, as a theater practitioner myself, I really enjoyed this like realistic portrayal of it, and I really enjoyed the like seeing her just like do theater assignments. It was great. This was also a super diverse book. So this book its own voices for the Chinese American representation, and I think for the bisexual rep as well, because Jordan is bisexual, and actually there's kind of a subplot or like an element of her discovering that. There are also multiple gay characters, there is a Sikh character, and there's also a lot of discussion about socioeconomic status. Like, Jordan's family is from a very like low income background, and that is a very active part of this plot and part of the reason why she wants to succeed so much, and I really like how that was explored. Another thing I thought this book did really well was like the exploration of gender and sexuality, and the explicit contrast that Jordan draws between what she is doing versus the way that a lot of transgender people are forced to live their lives every day. She actually like has a specific moment where she realizes that, and how what she's doing is never going to be the same, and I just thought that was so sensitively handled, it felt like, and I don't think I've ever read a book with like this trope that explicitly addressed that before, so that was really wonderful to see. The only things that I didn't absolutely love about this book were there were a couple of times where the writing got a little bit over descriptive and over the top, and I think that it happened a lot of like emotional moments, so I feel like I kind of was distanced almost like from the emotional impact of what was happening, but those were pretty few and far between. And I also would have liked to just see more of Jordan as a theater student, because we know that she's in this a cappella group, but there's no real discussion of like, okay, is this what she wants to do now? Like, does she want to specifically go into musical theater? Does she want to be an actress? Does she want to do both? Like, it just would have been nice to see how that fit into what she wanted to do with her career. But overall, I absolutely loved this. I loved the ending. It made me like super emotional, which I was not really expecting, and I gave Noteworthy 4.5 stars. Next, I finished Binti by Nadia Okorafor. This was actually chosen for me by my friend Huck as one of the like Friends Choose My TBR challenge or video that I did, and I'm so glad I finally got to this because I really enjoyed it. So this is a novella, so it's very short, but basically we follow our main character Binti, and she gets accepted into this interplanetary, I guess, university that nobody from her culture has ever been accepted to before. And while she's traveling on a spaceship, something happens. That's really all I knew and all I can really tell you. I love how quickly I grew to like and admire Binti despite it being such a short story. I don't feel like I really have a full grasp of her character yet and kind of her personality, but I think that's going to come in the next two installments. But I just really admired her strength and her courage. I also love how, despite being such a brave character, she still had moments where she was overwhelmed and where she broke down. Like, it felt very real to me, and I really liked that. I also really liked the science fiction elements and the particular things that Nadia Okorafor does that I haven't really seen done in quite this way before. I know that's super vague, but how those kind of intersected with consciousness. I really enjoyed that part, and I just feel like the whole like plot and like the world and kind of the alien species that we see glimpses of, I just thought that was so interesting, and I'm so excited to continue the series, and I give it 4 stars. Next, I finished The Fairies Return and Other Tales by Gail Carson Levine. This is actually a bind-up of all 6 of the novellas in this series, and this was actually chosen for me by my friend Giselle as part of our like 5-star TBR exchange. And these are basically all fairy tale retellings, and I really enjoyed this. I thought they were so much fun, and I really like how Gail Carson Levine can like take these fairy tales, she makes them like so logical that they're ludicrous. And I really enjoyed that. Like, some of the implications of these stories are just absurd, and I love that she just ran with that. I think my favorite, or definitely my favorite, was Princess Sonora and the Long Sleep. I absolutely loved that story. I think I ended up giving the collection 4 stars. The reason that some of the stories didn't work for me as well as others, a lot of times it came down to the particular style of humor in that story, and sometimes it worked for me more than others. Next, I read what was probably my most surprising book of the month, and that was From Twinkle with Love by Sanjay Menon. This is the companion novel to When Dimple Met Rishi, and we follow our main character Twinkle, and she wants to be a filmmaker. And she, like, the book is formatted as if she's writing these letters to famous female filmmakers. That's really hard to say. And it's kind of like a diary style format. Twinkle wants to make a movie, and there's sort of this like love triangle involving 2 brothers, which is not something I thought I would be okay with, but it ended up being done really well. And there's also all these themes of like friendship and also her family. So I was not the biggest fan of When Dimple Met Rishi. I liked it. I thought it was okay, but I didn't love it like I was hoping to, so I was actually not sure how I was going to feel about this one. And for the first half or so, I was not really feeling it. I didn't really like the format of the book. Like, it felt like it was just an excuse to make it connect to film in some way. Like, it didn't really feel like she was writing letters at all. I didn't really connect to Twinkle as a character. I felt like all of the side characters and everything were very like shallow and one note, and they were kind of just props for the story. But after that halfway point, everything changed and I started loving it. We got so much more depth to the side characters and to Twinkle herself. I really kind of grew to love the way this, like the format the story was told and how conversational and fun it was. It really does read more like a series of diary entries than letters to these filmmakers. So I think if you go in expecting that, you won't be disappointed. I thought the romance was super cute. I really loved the scenes with Twinkle and her family, and there were a couple of parts that like I really got choked up at, because it was about like losing family members and how we don't always see our parents as people who can be like devastated by things, you know? And I thought that was really beautifully done. One of my favorite things about this book was the way it explored art and truth-telling in art and what that looks like and how it doesn't always look like what you think. I loved the way this book ended. Like, I had kind of predicted how some things were gonna go, but I was so happy when they did happen that way. As far as content, I do want to mention that Twinkle's mother seems to suffer from pretty severe depression, it seems like, and I don't feel like that was completely resolved, but overall I really enjoyed this book. I'm so glad I gave Sanjay Menon a second chance, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read The Fairy Ring by Kiki Hamilton. We follow our main character, what's her name? Tiki? And she's living on the streets of London with a bunch of charming orphans, and the story kind of starts when she finds a ring that is apparently like this symbol of a pact between the fairy species and the humans, that like the fairies wouldn't attack them or something. I didn't like anything about this. It was really boring. It took so long for the fairy elements to actually show up. All of the characters were flat. The main character Tiki was kind of an idiot, and the romance was absolutely ridiculous. I like couldn't handle it. There was like one side character who had like glimmers of personality. He was one of the princes. That was it. This girl's so dumb. Like, at one point she's trying to sneak into Buckingham Palace to like hide a ring or steal the ring, I don't remember, and she's talking to the prince and she's asking him about the ransom. She's like in disguise so he doesn't know who she is, that she's the one who took the ring, and she's like, so what's the plan for when somebody returns the ring? And he's like, well, we're kind of expecting a ransom note. And she's like, so what would this ransom note look like? And he's like, well, like, he gives her an example, and she's like, okay, so if you got this ransom note, would you like give them the money and this person could just like leave the ring here? And he's like, yeah, that could work. And just this entire conversation, like, she's so obvious about the fact that like she's the person who stole the ring, and like I couldn't handle it. She must be like the worst spy in the world. Although, like, I guess it ended up working out because apparently all the other characters were equally stupid, so she was able to fool them. But yeah, I gave this 2 stars. Next, I finally finished 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Everyone knows what this book is about. It's a heist story, and it's like this group of ragtag characters who band together to do this thing. I buddy read this with my friend Katie from A Sea of Tomes, and I was really disappointed in this. I'm not the biggest fan of the Grisha trilogy, as everyone knows, but I was expecting this to be like substantially better, and I did like it better than those books, but not by a whole lot. I feel like tragic backstory was substituted for actual character development and like personality. I feel like the main romance kind of came out of nowhere, and I was supposed to be like super invested in it, and I ended up not really caring at all. I found the entire like heist plot super predictable, which wouldn't normally bother me, except that seemed to be the only thing this book was supposed to have going for it, and I just didn't care. I thought the ending was ridiculous. I did really love the humor, and I think the writing of this book overall was a lot better, so I didn't completely hate everything about it. I love Nina. I really love Wyland. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Yeah, very disappointed. I have a full spoiler-free review and discussion that I will link if you want my full thoughts, but Oh, and as far as content warnings, there's a lot of murder, a lot of body horror type gore things, and some human trafficking as well. Next, I finished Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. So this is about our main character, Eleanor Oliphant, and we know that she is very like set in her ways. She has her routine. She has this boring job that she doesn't really care about, and she eats the same thing every day. And every weekend she buys 2 bottles of vodka and goes home to drink them. And it's like, we know right from the beginning that she thinks she's okay and she's really not. And we're kind of like learning like what has happened that made her live her life this way. I really, really didn't like this book. And I also want to mention, like, I think this book is deliberately mismarketed, at least from what I saw, because I thought this was going to be like the way it's described and the way I've always seen it like represented is that it's a contemporary that has kind of a darker edge to it, you know, and we're learning about all this baggage that Eleanor has in her past, but it's like this kind of quirky, like learning to love life kind of story. And that is not what this book is, and it puts readers and reviewers in the really uncomfortable position of having to give content warnings for things that spoil the book. So if you know that you're not usually bothered by content, like any kind of content things, I'll put a timestamp in the description where you can skip that. But I do want to mention, like the things in this book that are kind of shown as like plot twists, and really these are things that people should know like going in. So just reading off my list here, suicide or attempted suicide, depression, physical and emotional abuse, especially of children, trauma, and lots of fat phobia. And I just really didn't like how these things ended up being handled. I do want to say there were some things I thought this book did well. I thought it was pretty well written. I think like I liked that we got to see Eleanor grow. She does develop into a more sympathetic character as the book goes on, and I really liked starting to see her friendships that she made with people. I think all of those things were done really well, but there were a lot of things that I think this book did not do very well. For one thing, Eleanor goes through life thinking that she's better than everyone else, and especially that she's better than ordinary people, and that doesn't change by the end of the book. So here's an example of something I really, really didn't like that Eleanor says, and this is not something that is challenged by the end of the book. So she's talking about one of the people that she makes friends with, talking about his mother, who just seems like a really nice and wonderful person. It struck me that in the nicest possible way, she didn't really have a personality. She was a mother, a kind, loving woman, about whom no one would ever say, "She was crazy, that Betty," or "You'll never guess what Betty's done now," or after reviewing psychiatric reports, Betty was refused bail on grounds that she posed an extreme risk to the general public. She was, quite simply, a nice lady who'd raised a family and now lived quietly with her cats and grew vegetables. This was both nothing and everything. And I think that we're supposed to feel that that's kind of a positive description, but kind of like in light of what happens later in the book and the fact that Eleanor never really moves past this idea, it basically comes down to the fact that like if you're not like desperately unhappy, you're not an interesting enough person. And I just really didn't like that. I find that like very unhealthy in a lot of ways. Like just this fact that if you are nice to people, you can't be interesting. I really don't like that idea, and this is something I maybe wouldn't have picked up on, except that the way the book ended, like it doesn't seem like Eleanor ever like grew past that. Like she's very fat phobic in the way that she like sees and responds to people, and that is challenged by the book, which I liked. But yeah, like I don't know if this is something that's gonna bother everyone, but like I really, really hate that in books and in life when people act like if you're not outwardly expressing a lot of unhappiness, then you must have a perfect life, for one thing, and also that you must not be a worthwhile or interesting person. Like you have no, she says like she had no personality because she was nice, and I just hate that. But the thing that I really hated about this book that was like the biggest issue I had that made me drop my rating down so much was at the end, something happens that is used as a plot twist and it's never addressed again, and it's specifically related to Eleanor's trauma. And I just really didn't like how that was used as like a shock value thing. And I don't think that fit in with how mental health was handled in the rest of the book, because I feel like it was handled in a much healthier way until we got to that point, and it was like this tragic, terrible thing is just used as a plot twist, and then it's never talked about again. It happens right at the end of the book, and nobody reacts to the way this has like changed like how you see the whole rest of the book. Like nobody's bothered by it. I know I'm in the minority here. A lot of people really love this book. There were some good things about it, but unfortunately that didn't make up for all of the things I didn't like about this book, and I gave it 2.5 stars. Next, I read The Orchard Book of Stories from the Ballet, and this was retold by Geraldine McColgren, illustrated by Angela Barrett. And I really loved this. Really beautiful, really cozy, some of them occasionally very disturbing, because some of the famous ballets are quite depressing, but I thought this was a really beautiful version of that. And I'll show you some of the illustrations. I did really like the illustration style. I did really enjoy this. I think my favorites in this collection were La Sylphide and The Firebird, and that's partly because those are lesser well known, so I don't see them a lot in these collections, but I did really enjoy this. Although, like I said, if you plan to use this as like a picture book for kids, just like read it first and make sure you know what you're getting into. Next, I finished The Wicked King by Holly Black. This is the sequel to The Cruel Prince. I am such trash for this series, and I don't say that because I'm embarrassed that I like them, because I'm not, but I say that because there are so many things about these books that mean that I shouldn't enjoy them as much as I do, but I just absolutely love these books. Like, despite the fact that I really don't always like Jude as a main character, I find her pretty frustrating and inconsistent sometimes. I like that we focused more on the political things in this book, even though there were a couple of points where it got like very intensely political and I was struggling to remember who was who, but eventually I adjusted to it and I ended up really enjoying that. We spent less time with the Court of Shadows, which I liked because I found that super boring in the first book. I like that we get to see the world expanded more. I like that we got so much character development for Cardan. I think we got some character development for Jude. I liked her more in this book by far, so that was nice. But yeah, it's like, it sounds like I had kind of mixed feelings about this book, but I loved the experience of reading it so much. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I can't really say too much about what it was about because it is the sequel, and despite being spoiled for the ending, for literally the last page, I really enjoyed it and I'm so excited for Queen of Nothing. Next, I finished The Girl with the Red Balloon by Catherine Locke, and this is a sort of historical fiction, a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of magic. It's a really interesting genre mashup. So we follow our main character Ellie, and at the very beginning of the book, she is visiting the Berlin Memorial, and she grabs this red balloon and she gets transported back in time to the time when East Berlin and West Berlin were still a thing. I don't remember the exact year, but that's kind of how the story starts. And then along the way, she sort of gets caught up with these other characters and she realizes that there's this group of people who are running these magic balloons to people to help them escape over the Berlin Wall. And there are 3 points of view. So we have Ellie, and then we have Kai, who is of Romani descent, and he is one of the runners. And we also get another character who is a Jewish person during World War II. And we follow him as he's living in one of the ghettos. And this is a very intense and very emotional book. If you don't want to read about World War II and the Holocaust, definitely steer clear of this one because that is a segment of the story. I thought all 3 points of view were equally compelling. I love how real Ellie felt and how her, like, kind of like what I was saying with Binti, how her courage and her fear both felt very real. And I really grew to connect to her and some of the other side characters as well. Like, when we first met Kai, he seemed a little bit stereotypical, that kind of like broody guy character, but he ended up being so much more than that, and I really grew to love some of the other side characters like Mitzi. This is another book that has really complex themes of guilt and responsibility and some other things that I can't really get into. I thought the thematic elements and like the hard decisions these characters had to make were handled so well. Another thing that was really great about this book is the diversity and the representation. So this is Own Voices for Jewish Rep, and Ellie is Jewish, and you really see that in her daily life. And as far as other representation goes, we have Kai, who, like I said, is one of the Romani people, and we also have a lesbian side character. I don't know if those aspects were Own Voices or not, but I thought that was just beautifully woven into the story. The ending was incredibly powerful. I just thought the storytelling of this book was phenomenal. I gave it 5 stars, if you can't tell. And finally, the last book I read in February was The Arctic Incident by Owen Colfer. This is the second Artemis Fowl book, and we have a whole live show on Taylor's channel, which I will link if you want our full spoilery thoughts. But I loved this, as I expected to. This is actually one of my favorites in the series, I think. I like how the action scenes in this book are used to explore a character more, because I tend not to really be interested in action scenes, but I feel like these were used for a purpose, and I really loved that. I just love that you start seeing in this book that Artemis isn't irredeemable and Holly isn't completely set in her ways about humans being bad all the time. I just feel like you start seeing that complexity here. We also start to see this recurring theme of the series about how if you love people or you care about people, it can make you do things you normally wouldn't, and sometimes that's a really good thing and sometimes it's not. I like that we start to see that here, and yeah, 5 stars. I loved it. It's one of my favorites. Okay, everybody, so that was my February wrap-up. Let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or what your favorite thing you read in February was. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!